On March 11, 2011, a single event off the coast of Japan triggered a triple catastrophe: a massive earthquake, a devastating tsunami, and a terrifying nuclear disaster. And its power was so immense, it didn't just shake a nation, it literally changed the planet. So, let's get into it. First, just try to imagine this: the ground under your feet shaking violently, not just for a few seconds, but for 6 entire minutes. That was the reality, an almost unbelievable amount of time that set the stage for everything that was about to happen. And the force behind all that shaking, a magnitude 9.1. Now, this wasn't just any old earthquake. This was the most powerful quake to ever hit Japan in its recorded history, and the fourth strongest the world had seen since we started keeping track back in 1900. So let's set the scene. It's Friday, March 11, 2011. The time is 2:46 in the afternoon, local time. About 72 kilometers off the east coast of Japan, deep under the ocean, the Earth just breaks. The scale of this thing was immediately clear, right up to the highest levels of government. When Japan's prime minister at the time, Naoto Kan, said this, it really captured the shock of the entire nation. This was a crisis on a level they hadn't seen since the Second World War. And the power here was, well, it was literally planet-altering. Get this. Japan's main island was physically shoved 8 feet closer to North America. The entire planet actually wobbled on its axis. And, if you can believe it, the Earth's rotation sped up, making every day from then on 1.8 microseconds shorter. That's the kind of power we are talking about. So how in the world does an earthquake get strong enough to physically move a country and actually change time itself? Well, the answer lies deep, deep beneath the ocean floor. What happened was something called a megathrust earthquake. You've got these massive tectonic plates, right? The Pacific plate is always trying to grind its way underneath Japan. For hundreds of years, it got stuck, building up an incredible amount of stress, kind of like coiling a spring, tighter and tighter and tighter. Well, on March 11th, that spring just violently snapped. And when that spring snapped, the result was unbelievable. A crack in the earth, 310 miles long, suddenly shot upwards, lifting the entire seafloor by several meters. And this one single colossal push of water is what kicked off the next, and by far the deadliest, part of the disaster. All that energy from the rupture had to go somewhere. It exploded into the ocean, creating a tsunami on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. And the speed was just terrifying. At 2:46 p.m., the quake hits. Just 8 minutes later, the first warnings are going out. But by 3:12 p.m., that's only 26 minutes after the shaking started, the first waves were already smashing into the coast. In less than an hour, major pieces of infrastructure, like Sendai Airport, were completely underwater. The numbers behind this wave are just staggering. In the open ocean, it was traveling at the speed of a jetliner. At its highest point, the wave reached 133 feet. That's taller than a 10-story building. It pushed up to 6 miles inland and just rolled right over these massive seawalls that were supposed to protect the coast. And this is what reveals a really grim truth about this whole disaster. As historic as the earthquake was, it was the tsunami that was the real killer here. Over 90% of the nearly 20,000 people who died from drowning. The human cost was incredibly concentrated right along that Tohoku coast. The prefectures of Miyagi, Iwate, and Fukushima, they really bore the brunt of the devastation. You can see they accounted for almost all the lives lost, and the thousands of people who are still missing to this day. But unbelievably, the disaster still wasn't over. That wall of water set off a third crisis, one that would have consequences lasting for decades to come: a full-blown nuclear meltdown. What happened next was just this devastating chain reaction of failures. So first, the earthquake hits, and the reactors automatically shut down, just like they're supposed to. But then, the tsunami comes over the seawalls and destroys the backup diesel generators, the very things needed to pump coolant and keep the reactors from overheating. With no power, the cores got hotter and hotter, creating explosive hydrogen gas that eventually just blew the reactor buildings apart. The result was the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. A 12-mile exclusion zone was set up around the Fukushima Daiichi plant, forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes, many of whom would never be able to return. But the story doesn't end in Japan. The sheer amount of energy unleashed that day rippled across the entire Pacific Ocean, and the effects were felt thousands and thousands of miles away. This comparison really shows you the insane reach of this event. In Japan, the devastation was immediate, it was total. But that wave's energy traveled across the entire Pacific. It hit the coasts of North and South America with enough force to cause damage, and tragically, even a death in California. Debris from Japan was still washing up on shores in the US and Canada years later. And maybe the most incredible example of its power, the seismic waves traveled over 8,000 miles to Antarctica and broke off a chunk of ice the size of Manhattan. When it was all said and done, the final toll wasn't just human, it was economic. With damages estimated at $360 billion, the 3.11 disaster became the single most expensive natural disaster in all of human history. This was an event that completely overwhelmed some of the best-prepared defenses on the entire planet. It forced a nation, and really the world, to face a terrifying reality. And it leaves us with this huge fundamental question. When our walls and our warnings and our best-laid plans all fail against the full force of nature, what do we do next?